Deputy Speaker, I've had the privilege in the last few weeks of visiting some of my local aged care residences and retirement villages, and I've been very grateful for those invitations to the new Revera Place that the Richmond Club has opened, to the Uniting's Hawkesbury Village aged care facility in Richmond, and to Riverside Gardens, a lovely retirement village in North Richmond. What those visits have demonstrated is ongoing concern amongst our ageing population and their families about levels of services. For those in retirement villages, it's things like in-home care and getting the response that you need when you just need a bit of help to stay in your own independent space. But they're also concerned about access to after-hours GPs, and that's something we really need to consider, how we better deliver those sorts of services to the more outlying areas of Sydney. Might be great in the CBD, but in areas like mine, they're hard to come by. For those who are living in aged care and their families, there are always concerns about the adequacy of dementia support and the adequacy of government funding to ensure the right numbers of staff to look after people with quite high needs. So I will continue to work with my local aged care facilities and my seniors in retirement villages. They have done so much for our country. They are now in their twilight years and they really deserve our support, ensuring they have a high standard and high quality of life as they hopefully slow down and take it a bit easy.